With another video, and this video is going to be analyzing Leicester versus Liverpool in their most recent Premier League match this morning. And this is going to be made using Keyframe, which is a high level, professional level platform where you can create content and produce illustrations to then send out to whoever you make content for and improve the learning process. So let's get right into it, and I just want to start really quickly because there's a lot of things to talk about. And the first of which is Liverpool's build-up structure. And we're going to start here, but they build with two center backs. Their recent signing making his debut for Liverpool, but let's keep going. And then we have their basic 2-3 build-up structure with Gini Wijnaldum as the holding midfielder. So, key aspect of this that I noticed in today's match was the tendencies for the players who occupy the half spaces higher and just wider than the center backs. Their tendency was to move deeper. So here we have Thiago moving deeper into the area next to Gini Wijnaldum, and Trent Alexander-Arnold as well, staying deeper and again next to Gini Wijnaldum to create their 2-3 build-up shape. And the purpose of them moving deeper, we can tell that it was to break the connections of Leicester's 4-4-2 midfield shape. So Leicester played with a 4-4-2 in their defensive phase, and from here the players responsible for pressing the players occupying the positions alongside Gini Wijnaldum in the 2-3 build-up. This task fell on the wide midfielders for Leicester. So by dropping deeper, we increase the distance these players have to press, and by doing so, the further they have to go to press, the more space, which will then in turn be between the lines. So that was the first major point from the Liverpool build-up and how it interacted with Leicester's defensive shape. And a lot of times, if these wide players for Leicester, I'll highlight them, these wide players for Leicester, if they were to cheat and go early to go and press, then this would oftentimes create breaks in connection, which could then be exploited through a diagonal pass straight from the Liverpool center backs. And as well as this, when players like Thiago, when they move from a higher area into this deeper position, they cross the field of view of the central midfielders of Leicester, which then can drag them out, as we see, which happens slightly here. So again, a lot of ways to manipulate the 4-4-2 that Leicester implemented and create space in the build-up phase. So here we have again just what we just talked about. When players go too early to press, we have our 2-3 build-up shape, but it almost looks like a 4-1 because of how deep the players alongside Gini Wijnaldum go. But it is a 2-3, typical from Liverpool. And now we see the Leicester defensive shape and the breaking connections that we were talking about of the wide midfielder because of his responsibility to press the wide player in the build-up phase. So I'm going to make that blue. So the right midfielder from Leicester goes early, which then in turn creates space between the lines for Liverpool to access right away. So just wanted to highlight that, and a diagonal pass from Jordan Henderson into this area to break the connections. And then with Thiago dropping, we have a potential for an overload, which we'll see in a second. The overload between the lines created by Curtis Jones and Sadio Mane, and now Liverpool is using single width to hold the wide areas, and this is created by Andy Robertson, who's not on the screen but will hold a place marker. So we have this dynamic between the lines for Liverpool, between Mane and Curtis Jones, and this half space we can we must note that it's overloaded at the moment. So we have Thiago deeper, Curtis Jones higher with Mane, and then holding the strong side is Firmino. So just to note that even though this side is overloaded with both of the attacking midfielders, Firmino still plays a crucial role in holding the balance of the structure and making sure that both areas between the lines and advanced areas are occupied. But then now we can look at the shape from Leicester and how they were drawn out. We can't see the right fullback. I'll put that here as a placeholder. So we can see the dynamic of the players between the lines now. Mane comes from a deeper area and a wider area to occupy the space just between the strong side central midfielder and the strong side right midfielder. And by occupying this space, he then receives the ball with space in front of him. By receiving the ball closer to these midfielders, he then has all this space in front of him where he can turn and progress the ball. And then this is made possible by Curtis Jones positioning closer to the defensive line, because he effectively pins the players back and holds this space and allows Mane more space to turn and progress through. And then last little bit of the structure is Salah making the run in behind, also pushing the back line a little bit deeper. So a lot of ways Liverpool influenced the structure of Leicester. And continuing this move, we see Mane, he's able to attack the space created that we just highlighted from Curtis Jones. And we see when he runs at a back four, it's oftentimes one player has to jump eventually. This, in this case, was the right fullback, which then creates all this space in behind for Mane to utilize himself if he wins the one-on-one battle, or for Andy Robertson to be played in behind. So again, another dynamic of running a back four when you receive the ball between the lines and stemming from the overload to create space. And now we're going to look at Leicester's build-up for a little bit. So Leicester in possession played with a back four, and their width varied quite a bit. But this is more about the defensive system for Liverpool. So first, I want to show Firmino occupying a holding midfielder, which is pretty typical. That's his role in the pressing phase. And when he does this, we have players like Mane and Salah. They come more narrow. I'm going to make that red. They come more narrow to press the center backs on Leicester, trying to use their cover shadows to force the play into the middle. But this often was also one of the reasons why Leicester were able to progress through the wide areas, because with Salah and Mane coming more narrow, the use of the midfielders of Liverpool was also stretched, because they were also responsible for the wider players. So we can just look here that the Liverpool shape is pretty stretched. So we're going to highlight Leicester's back four in build-up. We've noted already that Salah and Mane are pressing from out to in, pressing the center backs, but now we see the Liverpool shape. So we're going to highlight the front three from Liverpool. And now the double pivot and the wide players create the maximum space for Leicester in the wide area. So we have our front three pressing, one accounting for the holding midfielder, and now the Liverpool midfielders are very stretched. Just the two attacking midfielders here. The distance created between them is very stretched, and Firmino is there to shorten this distance a little bit, but just to show the distance and the connections that are no longer there from them. And this stems from pressing players in the wider area. So Leicester had just circulated the ball, and Mane's cover shadow was beaten. So Curtis Jones stepped out, and now we have players in behind. And with Firmino not being able to control both the double pivot, this also requires Thiago to step, which then creates more space between the lines. So essentially we have Gini Wijnaldum covering the press, but he is now responsible for covering the full width of the field in attempts to cover the press and having these midfielders dragged out. And with the use of the mid-range pass from Leicester to players like Harvey Barnes and Albrighton in the wide area, often left Liverpool exposed and an opportunity for Leicester to press the ball. So here's the pass that I was talking about, the mid-range pass, and Liverpool's shape is now broken, and we see Gini Wijnaldum, the player stuck between the lines with too much of a gap between the press of Liverpool, and maybe this will show it, for the press of Liverpool and the back four. So we look at the huge distance left from the back four from Liverpool, and now the press, and all this space was left on Gini Wijnaldum to try and cover, and these mid-range passes were very effective against Liverpool to skip the press. So now, and then we see the numbers that Leicester also have committed forward. They have James Maddison, Harvey Barnes, and Jamie Vardy, all in advanced areas, and with a 3v3 against the back line. So now another opportunity to look at Leicester's build-up shape. Again, this is a different form of progression. This is through the center area, which they didn't progress through the wide area every time. But we see Tielemans as the holding midfielder, and now a more structure from the front three of Liverpool, but with Firmino pressing now, his use of the cover shadow is left a little more inefficient, but we also see the positioning of the center backs for Leicester positioning more narrow and less in the half space and more in the center corridor, which creates a longer passing distance to their fullbacks, which in turn, so a longer passing distance to the fullbacks, which in turn forces the Liverpool wingers, meaning Mane and Salah, they force them deeper by overextending this distance. So even if this passing option isn't available, it creates more time and space and a numbers advantage for Leicester in possession because of the lack of ability for Mane and Salah to then press from out to in on the center defenders of Leicester. So now, moving forward, when Firmino drops off to stop the press, to control the space by the holding midfielder, Tielemans, this creates the opportunity to use a blindside movement because of the positioning of the Liverpool front three, and again, the separation between the lines of Liverpool. They left a lot of space between their lines, and their vertical compactness was compromised a lot. So not only this, but Liverpool give Leicester an advantage to use their blind spots to progress effectively. And what I mean by this is Tielemans at the moment looking to move through the blind spot and exploit a passing option for Leicester. And then with his fullbacks higher in the blind side of the wingers, they'll have more players to then go and progress. But This also needs to be noted that the shape of Liverpool is ideal for the offensive progression in the transition phase because Mane and Salah have access to the gaps created from Leicester's back four, and with Firmino sitting a bit deeper usually, he's in a crucial position to get on the ball and then play them in a 3v2 or 2v2 situation. So just to note the benefits of Liverpool's structure, but also again we see the massive gap that's afforded to Leicester to then look to progress. So we have Tielemans gets on the ball from using his blindside movement, and then Leicester start to progress through the wide area, and we can see now just the midfield shape. And again, one thing to note is Leicester's midfielders played quite narrow at times, but this gave them the potential to use the wide areas. As I've just highlighted the structure of the midfield three, this gave Leicester the ability to then move into the half space like James Maddison is doing here, outside of the influence of the midfield three of Liverpool, and then progress around the midfield three and through the half space. Because we look at the lack of vertical compactness from Liverpool and look at the over compactness horizontally from their midfielders. Each player is about, I'd say, 5 to 8 yards between each other horizontally, which leaves tons of space in the half spaces and the ability for Leicester to move around the shape to progress the ball. So here we have Maddison receiving the pass on the half turn coming from Tielemans, and then now he has the space to progress through with double width being created through the wide area of the fullback and the left winger to then progress through. And Liverpool's shape of over compact horizontally in the midfield leads to their progression, or their shape being broken through the wide area and then again accessing the space in between the lines vertically. So then just an example of where the move goes into the wide area, and we have players like Jamie Vardy, who's on the weak side shoulder of the center back, looking to make these runs in towards goal, starting away and moving the blind side of the defenders. But then we have little situations of 2v1 through the wide area, exposing the fullbacks of Liverpool at times when the midfield and forwards were broken in their shape. So now a little piece from Liverpool's build-up again. We have Jordan Henderson on the ball, who played quite well in possession of the ball. His range of passing was effective, and then now we have Thiago, Wijnaldum, and Curtis Jones with the front three of Liverpool playing more narrow. And just a note on the shape, when the midfielders of Liverpool would drop into their 2-3 build-up shape, so when Curtis Jones would drop deeper, he could then influence two players from Leicester, as he's doing here. At his starting position was between them, and he crosses their field of view, which narrows them and influences their movement and allows Jordan Henderson to play a more direct pass around the block of Leicester. And we see Thiago doing similar instance on the far side. Thiago's positioned between two midfielders, and this is just another way to draw Leicester's players forward and then exploit this space in behind for Firmino and Mane, who are occupying the space in behind while Robertson is controlling the width. So here Robertson on the ball, and we can look at the wide structure of Liverpool. So these wide area connections, always one person at the base, one person controlling the width, and now a threat in behind or between the lines. So we look at the midfielders of Leicester, who are drawn forward by the movement of Curtis Jones, and now with Mane making these runs in behind, or these double movements, first in behind to then receive the ball between the lines. It narrows and makes the defenders of Leicester move into deeper positions to protect the more dangerous space, which is obviously the space closer to goal in this situation. And now this will leave Mane space either in between the lines, or if he can create a dynamic advantage to then exploit the space behind the center defender. While in the meantime, Robertson has the time on the ball to make a decision on the situation. So now, again, Liverpool in possession. We have our build-up shape, and this goes back to what we talked about earlier, with the players moving into deeper areas to then create time and space on the ball for themselves. So we have Andy Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold moving deeper, which will then break the connections of Leicester's midfielders to then exploit the space in between the lines for the likes of Firmino, Salah, Mane, or Curtis Jones, or whoever else is in this space, in the half space between the lines, and Liverpool have then their structure of a 2-3 build-up. So here we're progressing on the right side, Leicester shape, 4-4-2. And now we can see the situation with the wide midfielder jumping to go and press Trent Alexander-Arnold, and then leaving Salah in the wide area to then become the free man between the lines. And we also have players like Milner in the meantime playing between midfielders to then influence them even more to emphasize the space of Salah. And then now the structure between the lines, Firmino and Curtis Jones occupying the advanced positions to take up, with Mane on the weak side holding the height and the width on the weak side. So just to note that Salah is the free player, and then we have our wide structure between the three advanced players, Milner, Salah, and Firmino, to then progress the ball against the back four. So Leicester were very good in the recovery, and their compactness was much more organized from their players than it was for Liverpool. And here, just want to highlight the wide structures because they're so important for Liverpool. And then the defensive shape from Leicester, with their outside midfielders going slightly higher. It is a 4-2-3-1 at times, but this advancement of their wide midfielders then creates the space for Liverpool's front players to access the space between the lines as a means to then access more dangerous areas. So the compactness and recovery rate of Leicester became much more important, which is then why the compactness of the double pivot and the two center backs became crucial in the attempts to shut off this space and then block progression from Liverpool, which they recovered from quite well at times. So just wanted to show that, and that's going to wrap up the video. It was a great game. Leicester won 3-1 against Liverpool, and they remain in the top four. And now Liverpool's title hopes and title defense looks like it has been destroyed to this point, and now they're fighting for the top four in a race between many teams. So I hope you liked the video. If you did, please like and subscribe to the channel. It means an awful lot, and I'll see you in the next one.